When life throws you a curveball, how are you going to handle adversity? Welcome to the Fearless Mindset Podcast, where you're about to go on a journey as I interview security, business, and entertainment leaders on what it takes to stay fearless. I'm your host, Mark Ledlow, and enjoy today's episode. Hello, folks. This is the Fearless Mindset Podcast, and this is Mark Ledlow. And today, we bring to you Mr. Michael Howard, former Chief Security Officer at Microsoft and former CIA operative in the CIA world and former law enforcement officer in Oakland, California. And he's, as you guys all know, he's run in leadership there in Las Vegas, Nevada, and doing some exciting things with, many of his clients, I'm sure, and helping them get the pandemic quirks and tweaks and trying to get everybody getting along again after getting locked out of their houses. How you doing, Mike? Thanks for coming on.
I'm doing well. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show. It's an honor.
You bet. Yeah, we've been trying to get you on, but you are one busy man flying all over the place and doing what your new life gives you.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be retired, but that didn't work out that way. So,
well, a man at your capacity and your what you've been doing, I don't think you could ever slow down.
You're right.
It's just that in your DNA. That's kind of how you're wired. Just go. Like to stay busy.
Yeah, I mean, when we got to the valley, my wife and I, we never contemplated this, and a lot of it was getting involved with community, charity, things that we're involved with. But then doing the writing and other things, it just, but the difference is doing what you really want to do. Not that I didn't want to do the things I've done in the past, but you have obviously more, you're masterless. You're more of a Ronin. So.
I like that. How have you enjoyed the writing role, being that now you can use your creative juices and you're away from Microsoft now? Has it been something you've been wanting to tap in for a while, just to express your experience in leadership in that capacity?
Yeah, it has. I've always wanted to write a book. I'm like you. I'm sure I'm a voracious reader, and I've always wanted to write. Never really had the time. Took advantage. You mentioned the pandemic, so I used to do this speech in the industry and at Microsoft on leadership. So I took that PowerPoint during the lockdown and turned it into a book, right? And the Art of Ronin Leadership that came out looks nothing like what I first wrote. As I got together with my good friend, and I call her a mentor in my writing world, Judith Briles. I call her the Brook Shepherd. When she first looked at it, she said, "You can't write, can you?" I said, "I've written my whole life. I write business stuff." And she said, No, this is different, But as I've learned, writers, usually the first couple copies kind of end up on the floor. But yeah, to get to your point, I really enjoyed the process. I like the process of writing. And then we finally got the first book out on leadership. And then I got the bug. And then wrote the second one based on feedback from the first book saying, "We love the first book. That's kind of at a macro level. Let's get it down to how do you build teams, and how do you get C-suite buy-in, all that other kind of stuff. So more how to do." And then I decided, okay, let's shelve that for a while. Let's try fiction. And I really, that's kind of my thing now. So I've got the first book out, full circle, and it was a blast to write. And nothing gives me more pleasure than carving out 3 or 4 hours in a particular day and just banging on the keys and just writing. I just love it. I love it.
You and Mike Trott have something in common. And you and Rick Prado.
I know, right?
You guys all former CIA guys, and you have that carpet of writing and the creative side to you guys. And you would never guess that with guys from the CIA. I would never think that.
No, and I'm sure, we're actually having a reunion of some of the folks from the agency here. But yeah, we would have never thought any of us would write books. That's for the other guys. That's for other people, right?
Sure.
Right. But it's kind of fun to see other people in the industry that we came from getting out there and telling their stories. And it's funny because all of us have to go through the same process. Once we finish a manuscript, it's got to go to the agency and they've got to approve it, right? So you're not revealing sources and methods.
That's a lot of
But-
work to get that approved by the agency. Not easy.
It is. Well, back in the old days, it was snail mail, right? You had to mail it in, and then they have to read it. Nowadays, you send it to an email address. I've been lucky because the first book they took out they took a picture. I had a picture of me in a particular location in Africa, and they said, "Well." And then the second book, maybe a sentence. And so I've had colleagues that they take out whole chapters. It's like, oops,
sorry, didn't mean to offend anybody over there.
Right.
The audience probably, if they don't know you, we have a lot of millennials probably listen to podcasts. I'd say under 30, they probably don't know your real background. I've been in the business for 15 plus years. I've been to Microsoft, handled some clients up there, but you were the head of security at Microsoft. You did that for several years, coming from the CIA. And what did you see in the enterprise system that really made you thrive? That what did you take from the CIA that really helped you be a success at Microsoft?
Well, yeah, good question. I've always told people, the CIA gave me the ability to lead and to grow my leadership acumen, right? And through a variety of roles I had for 22 years. And I always said I can always find my way in any enterprise, public or private. I'll figure it out, right? The big difference is that in the private enterprise world, as opposed to public sector, I say jump, and I'm a GS-15 or I'm an SIS, whatever. Anybody below me, you jump, right? I'm Chief Security Officer at Microsoft, and I say jump, and some of the business units say, why? Because you have no authority over me. So you have to learn what they call influence without authority, gaining political clout, getting your strategic allies in the C-suite to help buy in on your programs. But what I did take was organizational skills, people skills, obviously, because, if you're a spy, you spot, assess, develop, recruit, and get someone, to give you information. It's not as nefarious, but you still use those same skills to make sure people understand why they should buy into global security. What is it in for them, right? How does it make their business unit better, safer, more productive? And that was the lesson that I had to learn the whole way of doing things in a private enterprise. But vetting people within the organization to be part of the organization, driving global programs, those are all things that I learned from my formative years in the agency. So that wasn't new to me. The other piece of it was, I, as well as some other folks in my group, because we'd grown up in the overseas world, we knew how the State Department worked overseas. We knew about regional security officers. We knew how to make liaison contacts with local police, military, and law enforcement. So when I traveled with my team overseas, besides seeing the Microsoft offices and meeting all the major stakeholders that we're protecting, we also make sure that we're talking to all these external stakeholders like the embassy and obviously our foreign liaison counterparts. Those are things that I really brought into the fold. I think it really helped us make us into perhaps one of the best global security organizations in the industry back then.
Was it hard for the transition for you coming from the government side, having that leadership background, trying to sell an idea to the C-suite, going, like you said, why should we? Why should I listen to you? Was that right, like going back through boot camp all over again? Police academy all over again? Well, how do I work with these guys that don't understand what I'm trying to do?
Yeah, it was initially. I mean, I made sure I took time. I didn't just. So my first job, I got hired out of the agency to run what they call Executive Protection Unit, EPU. So we ran the executive protection for Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, and some of the heavy hitters back in 2002 to 2003. Now, that gave me a leg up in one sense because I got to meet all the heavy hitters, right, up there. So that was great. I had no idea. I thought I was going to be fat, dumb, and happy doing that for a long, long time. And then the year after that, they made me the CSO. So then it became a thing of, okay, so how does this work? First, I had to know my own organization. And at that time, we were very U.S.-centric, well-intentioned, guys and gals, but very U.S.-centric. But the key I found out is they used to have this thing, I don't know if they have it anymore, it's called Directions on Microsoft. It was published by an outside entity, and they would map out all the major players within the company, like for what business unit, Windows, Office, blah, blah, blah. And I looked at that as a target list, right? And we started doing that year after year, but that first year I started looking at the target list. Okay, so I need to talk to this. And what I found out was they really didn't know the totality of global security, okay? It came really clear one time. We rolled up in IT at one point, and I was working executive protection that first year. And I remember there was a group chiefs meeting, right? Whatever. And the VP there, he was one of the people that actually hired me. So he goes around the room. You know, you typically go around the room. So, hey, Bob, tell me about the latest is happening in your unit, blah, blah, blah. And they go to the person that was running physical security at the time. And first of all, the VP didn't know the person's name. So I thought, that guy's not a player. The second thing was, security. Yeah, you're the guys that ride around in those white cars. We used to have these white vehicles. So that was a frame of reference from him. And that was a frame of reference for every stakeholder I talked to. And then when you told them the totality of what we did, yeah, we do man guarding around campuses. We also do kidnapping, extortion, and threats of violence against executives. We do intelligence analysis to make sure that we, kind of forestall any threats. We have technology. We have all, and then they kind of like, you guys do all that? Yeah. So it was an education piece. That education piece was critical in getting them to change their mindset about us, because now they knew, okay, so yes, it's important you have the man guarding, but when you're in different places around the world, it's good to know you have a travel safety organization that can not just track where you are, but if you're in trouble, get you the heck out of Dodge if necessary, right? And so all those things, it took time to educate, and we put a lot of emphasis on education and awareness. But it probably took 2-3 years to really get the major players to really understand what we were all about. And at the same time, we're going through transformation too, because I needed to vet the people in my organization. And they were, again, great people, but we came to a come to Jesus moment where I realized, my leadership team and I realized, Microsoft, when I got there was, 40,000 people. In the span of a couple of years, it doubled to 80. We started moving to China with a footprint, and I knew we were not in a position to handle that scale of growth. So we had this big come to Jesus meeting where people wanted to stay U.S. centric because, you could send investigators from the U.S. to Europe or to Mumbai to run a case. My argument was, you don't know anything about those places. If we hired investigators in those places that knew the cops, that knew the police, that knew the environment, why wouldn't we do that? And why would we have to spend all this money sending you over there? And so we finally, obviously, we made the right decision, went to globalize our program. So those are really interesting years, getting buy-in on the one hand and building capacity on the other hand to make sure we could scale to Microsoft's growth.
Wow, sounds like a beast. It's almost sounded like you had a little toddler, and then teaching the toddler how to get up and walk a little bit and take some steps and then fall down, and then that toddler becomes like 4 to 5 years old and start running a little bit. You're like, oh shoot, the thing's taking off.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Yeah, you're right. It was an interesting time. It was a heady time for us. Mm-hmm. But what typically happens is, you have a point where you don't have the capacity. So then we did a zero-based study, brought in an outside company, soup to nuts, every technology we had, 80, I think it was like 80 disparate technologies. Everything had been bolted on to our operations center. We had one in Redmond, Washington, Microsoft's headquarters. And the upshot of that was the idea of coming out with a global security operations center that integrated technologies end-to-end, partner products that would integrate with us, but not just one, 3 operations centers that would provide us true redundancy, interoperability, all those buzzwords, And I remember once we got the concept down and we had to sell it to Steve Ballmer because Gates had left at a QBR, a quarterly business review. There were only two items. There was expansion of the campus with my counterpart, Real Estate Facilities, and me. And we sold it. And he bought off on it. And it ended up being what really got us into the forefront of the security world. No one at that time had multiple operation centers. And to the point where people from my industry were benchmarking with us, governments. We had the president of Croatia at one time, Iraqi ambassador to the US. We had all kinds of people coming to benchmark with us to watch how did we do this? Because remember, you're well aware. Typical government organizations, you've got, okay, so what happens if the balloon goes up and bad things happen? Okay, well, we've got this list of a checklist. Okay, who's got the checklist? Mary's got the checklist. Where's the checklist? It's in Mary's cabinet under lock and key. Where's Mary? Mary's on vacation. She went to Florida. How do we get that, right? As opposed to having everything digital so that people have access to it and you just can. So little things like that.
Wow.
We even used to do a dog and pony show where we would shut down our operations center in Redmond with our guests around us. And then we could see a live feed. We have an officer somewhere on campus. We would have either Hyderabad, India, where one of our operations centers were located, or the UK, radio over IP. They would radio that officer in Redmond and say, there's a fight going on in this particular location on campus. They could see the person getting the call and then responding, right? So even if we were shut down in Redmond, we could still respond into North America with the other ones and vice versa. Wow. And it became, not only was it great for security and it got us really visibility in the security world, became a moneymaker.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I had a conversation one time in DC with a person with our public sector sales. They're selling to Army, Navy, Marines agency. And we just chatted, and we have a huge executive briefing center on campus in Redmond. And we got the idea. So rather than bring a group of, let's say CIA people out to Redmond, go to the EBC, we call it Executive Briefing Center, and watch a boring PowerPoint about PowerPoint because you want to sell them PowerPoint. Bring them to the operations center, our operations center. And we'll show them how we use the technology in an integrated fashion to make us more efficient. And it could be any enterprise that comes in there to watch. It doesn't have to be security. The negotiating piece on our part was, okay, if you seal the deal for a 3-year license and they pick their $10 million license, obviously your sales, you take the credit, but would you give us credit that we helped you seal the deal? And they said, yeah. And so after a while, we started capturing this and we called it revenue influencing. It became its own vertical. When we had revenue influencing people all around the world to service our salespeople, and we got credited for millions of dollars worth of sales. So we became a virtual profit center. So we weren't just a cost center, sucking money out of a company.
Sure.
So that was just a wonderful thing because not only could we help the company, but we learned as security people, when they brought in people, we learned the business of Microsoft, and it just made us better business enablers for the company.
You're right, Mike, because most security operations are a cost. They don't bring any add value to the C-suite. That's why most of the time they get cut out. Because what value to bring? Yeah, you're like a bunch of EP agents bring in security, but we really don't see the value. And then when you prove to your shareholders, hey, look at the value we're bringing to your salespeople. Oh, huh. And then the CFO goes, oh, we like these guys.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Exactly. And it was critical for us to make sure, again, targeting. We brought the COO and CFOs, and we brought all the heavy hitters in for the dog and pony show so they could see, so that they would be our advocates. Even if we didn't hear them advocate for us, we knew they would.
Wow. What a story. And then now I hear, I had a good talk with Ron Warman up there in the Seattle area. You know him pretty well. And he was telling me that he's having a lot of conversations with some C-suite, CSOs out there that are being told to axe their budgets right now this year. I'm like, what's going on out there? But these guys don't know how to show profitability as a business unit, like you said. And maybe that's the new norm. What is your advice to those chief security officers out there that are trying to figure out what the heck they're doing in their new role and they just, hey, you're the chief security officer. What's your advice to those folks in this new era that we're in?
Yeah, that's great. And it is a new era. I mean, I've known several CSOs that have had budget slashed, as you said, and having to take personnel cuts because they're part of the cost centers. Because number one, you have to do your homework when it comes to getting allies. You need allies. So even if you have a CFO that wants to cut everything because they're bean counters, if you have allies in HR and legal and all these other places that say, we work with these guys all the time, right? And so we need security to be robust, because if we have possible active shooter, or now we're reducing headcount, and now you got a lot of pissed off people that may want to come back on campus and do something bad. Well, security is the one that actually does the due diligence and looks at these people. So you need to have those alliances. The other thing that's critical is that CSOs in the physical security world have to realize things have shifted. So post 9/11, guys like me, flavor of the day. They wanted FBI, CIA, military, cops. They wanted us in there to bolster security because they're afraid that another 9/11 or some bad thing was going to happen. So now we're in the era of cyber, right? Digital, the digital world. So the CISO now has taken primacy, and they're worried about, protecting IP and the crown jewels. And so the CISO and their world now has the lion's share of money, right? And again, if you're a C-suite, you say, okay, look, we've invested in 10 years, 15 years in the physical security thing, and that's great, but nothing's happened. But we're seeing breaches here on the cyber, and we're going to shift monies. That means we've got to cut here. You have to make an alliance with the CISO. The CISO has to be an advocate for you as well. At Microsoft, again, there's nothing perfect. There's no perfect model, but we had a council that we put together, and the council included the CISO, me, business continuity, anyone involved in enterprise risk, end to end. We started this council, and we were very transparent about our multiple year strategies and how we can force multiply to work with each other, blah, blah, blah. But the idea is you build these relationships. You realize that, physical security needs cyber and vice versa. So if the cuts do start coming down, you may still get cut, right? Because ultimately it's up to a CFO to decide what's best from an operational standpoint, OpEx, but you have a better fighting chance as a CSO if you have allies with you that say, hey, you may want to think about this. So you may want to not make the cuts so draconian, but you just might want to think about, may have a conversation with the CSO and find out, what are his or her arguments. And again, you may still make the decision, especially in tech world, you got bloated, you got to cut back. Mm-hmm. That's the reality of the world. But yeah, it's happening. I've seen CSOs who leave, who've built wonderful organizations. And when they're gone, those organizations are either decimated or something else because there's nobody else to advocate. And it's a shame because everything's cyclical. And
it is.
When there's an active shooter, when there's a bomb that goes off somewhere and people in that particular enterprise are hurt, they're going to wonder, physical security. Yeah, but you cut us, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. What do you do?
You have it both ways, right?
Is it mainly the shareholders going, hey, we need to make more profit center and we didn't hit our earnings last quarter, so we'll start cutting. Okay, security is the first one to go. You don't bring any value anyway. That kind of the mentality that's in the corporate enterprise organizations.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's so much the shareholder. I think shareholders actually would, in many cases, maybe a little more aware, self-aware of the importance of something like security. I think really it becomes a paper exercise So there's two types of CFOs, okay, finance people. There are business enablers and bean counters, right? And I've dealt with all of them.
Sure.
The business enablers look at your business and say, okay, you got a budget. We're supposed to make some cuts, but let's have a conversation. And then they realize, okay, if we do this, there's a risk. Because the other thing, to get back to your question, going backwards a couple of steps.
Sure.
CSOs have to make sure, without saying the sky is falling. They have to make sure the C-suite understands the ramifications of their actions. So if you're going to cut X, we're not going to be able to do this. Maybe we won't be able to do the threat analysis, or maybe we won't respond as fast because we don't have the manpower, whatever the case may be. They have to understand that if you cut, you accept the risk. And then that may actually get into another conversation, which might be helpful to you, right? Because, bureaucrats don't necessarily want, to accept risk.
Right. True. Well said.
Something goes south, then it's on them, right?
Right.
Yeah. But there's the business enablers. Then there's just the traditional bean counter. I gave you 2 beans this fiscal year. You were supposed to spend 1 bean by the mid-year, so I'm going to take that bean away. Okay. But what happens if we get into January in the second half fiscal year and something bad happens? I need that bean. Well, there's no answer for that, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what CSOs and anybody in a cost center, they're dealing with. If you're lucky, you've got someone that understands and will work with you. And if you're not, you're not. And it's hard. I mean, I've gone through reductions in force before, but they were measured. And we were able to have that conversation. And while it still hurts to let people go, especially really good people, it's just something you face. As you know, if you're in a leadership position, it's going to happen at some point. But at least I would hope people in the C-suite would have a conversation. And if just give me a chance to advocate. And then if you decide to make the decision, okay, I took my best shot, right?
Right.
But I don't think that's necessarily happening in a lot of cases.
Got it. Okay. I know there's a lot of folks, friends of mine in Silicon Valley, that were cut. A lot of people just got cut on as they start laying off because the consumption rate in the economy is starting to die down there a little bit, and they got to adjust their books like any other company does.
Right. Right.
Now, what do you see? Everybody's trying to, forecast what's happening national security wise. Is it going to be very robust insecurity? We have a presidential election. Usually that causes strife from the pole from the left, from the right, and the centrist. Right. I'm sure we're going to have, it's going to be a little bit more polarizing. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe this last presidential election wasn't that chaotic. I mean, it was chaotic during the Trump run. It was not everything. Right. The whole country was burning down. What is your thoughts as far as? I know you're out of the security space now, but I'm sure you have a finger on the pulse. I hear people say, well, we have, the border's an issue, fentanyl's an issue. We got some terrorists running through. We got, you got some Chinese issues with, spying and all that. What is your consensus and what's your theory on all this craziness that the folks in the security industry are probably listening to this going, what does Mike think about what's going on in this, and what's his forecast for security needs in the U.S.?
Well, I mean, there's actually a symbiotic relationship between this question you're asking and what we just discussed, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think thought leaders in the C-suite we're supposed to be forward thinking strategically, right? So not knee-jerk reactions, even though today looks bad. And so we need to cut OpEx. What about downrange a year from now? So you've got, yes, you mentioned all the big ones. You've got the border, right? And if you have a presence anywhere in Southwest Texas and all that, you're probably going to have issues. I think the election, especially if you have the same 2 people that were there last time, it's going to be fairly polarizing, Sure. Kind of is amazing to me that in a country of 300-something million people, you got to find the same 2 people, 4 years later. But, but I guess that's another topic. That's for Meet the Press or whatever,
That's a good one.
But when you look at China, right? So the atmosphere in China is different for an enterprise now than it was when I was there. China was welcoming. We had a big presence in China. I went there many times to see with the troops, and it was great. But now it's adversarial, right? So you got to be really careful with your people in China. It's the same thing with Russia. The world's a lot more dangerous place in many respects, and I just think that from a security perspective, CSOs, it's even more critical now that you have robust teams globally that have the pulse of what's going on in that particular country. I mean, one of the things that's great about a really switched on global security organization is you have analysts, and many of them that come from the government, and they can give you the geopolitical analysis, give it to the C-suite, give it to the sales folks, the COO, whoever, say, this is what we think may be happening downrange in a couple of months. So you think about building more of a footprint here, you may want to think about it, or critical infrastructure or whatever. But if you cut back on that because you feel like, you don't need analysts. We have business analysts. They take care of that kind of stuff. Okay. I just think that you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. And I think these knee-jerk reactions are going to bite us in the future. And as you cut capacity on the physical side, you actually are hurting, people don't realize it, on the cyber side, because again, there's a relationship. They rely upon us for certain data. We rely upon them for certain data. There's a breach or something like that. You cut enough on this end, it hurts them on this end. And people need to start thinking about that as well. I think this is a time so I'm also not an advocate of just putting a whole bunch of bodies to a problem, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
But at least enterprises could take a critical look at security, enterprise-wide, or risk, just call it risk, and decide, okay, 3, 4, 5 years, this is where we want to go as a company. We want to expand here, cut back here. From a risk standpoint, what is it we need? And I'm not sure those conversations are happening.
Yeah, that's a good point. Really good point. Probably people are still living in the moment versus trying to forecast by quarters.
Exactly. That's not, I mean, there are smarter people than I that know, that know business, but there's too much knee-jerk reaction things as opposed to taking a thoughtful look. Yes, there are times where you got to pull the trigger right away and go because there's a fire and you got to do it. But really, you need the ability to look and see what are the threats, the emerging threats that are going to be happening, and what is it you need to keep your enterprise safe so that your people can do business and make more profit and be productive. If you don't have that capability, just because it looks good on a spreadsheet, hey, look how much OpEx we cut. Great, and then the quarterly things with Wall Street, hey, great profits and blah, 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 and you really cut back on staff. That's fine until something bad happens. And then what, right?
Exactly.